Now, to introduce our first panel, please welcome to the stage Janet Birch, Environmental Affairs Program Manager for Alaska Airlines.
Thank you and welcome everyone. What does it mean to achieve net zero? In the simplest terms, it means perfectly balancing the greenhouse gases we emit through all our activities with what we take away. Sounds pretty easy, right? But like a lot of things, that's easier said than done, because much of our economy and way of life has been built over many generations in the stuff that produces those greenhouse gases. And as we all know, old habits die hard. Still, we have some pretty compelling reasons to achieve net zero. Chief among them, the health of our planet and everything on it, including us and our future generations. We need look no further than the increased frequency, intensity, and severity of everything from wildfires, droughts, rising seas, and extreme storms, not just here in California, but around the world to know what's at stake. Alaska Airlines takes seriously our responsibility to achieve net zero, and we've set an industry-leading goal of 2040 to achieve it. Our net zero ambitions are part of our overall commitment to sustainability and reducing our impact on the planet. It's been baked into Alaska Airlines' DNA from our very beginnings. As outlined in our annual CARE report, Alaska has adopted 5 net zero strategies, including operational efficiency, fleet renewal, sustainable aviation fuel, new aircraft technology, and technology-based carbon removal. This is our evergreen journey. One of the most important of these areas is our work to support the development of sustainable aviation fuels. And we're proud to be working with the Bay Area Council on creating new policies and legislation to speed up the development and adoption of these innovative fuels. It's going to take massive investment, breakthrough research, science and discovery, and an unrelenting determination to see it through. And it's going to take all of us working together, public and private sector, to get it done. Today, we're going to hear from some top leaders on some of the current strategies and technologies for achieving net zero and the progress we're making. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Le-Quyen Nguyen, Deputy Secretary of Energy for the State of California's Natural Resources Agency. Kerrie Romanow, Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of San Jose. And Jason Glickman, Executive Vice President, Engineering, Planning, and Strategy for PG&E. And to lead our conversation, Bleveans, Executive Director, Sustainability, Utilities, and Infrastructure.
Great. Thank you very much for being here. This is really a remarkable panel, and we'll be talking about absolutely vital things. I do want to make one request of the audience, though. I have promised my panel, this was probably rash of me, but I've promised my panel that if we do well, we would get the wave at the end of the panel. So, and not wave energy, thank you. So with that, I want to jump in. I want to start with a general question and have each of you give a brief overview of how your different organizations are approaching the big goal of net zero. What are your top priorities? What are you putting your time, energy, and resources into? And I'd like to start with Secretary Nguyen, and we'll just move right across.
Thank you. So that's a big question right there, but you said brief, so I'll try and keep it brief. So I am Deputy Secretary for Energy at the California Natural Resources Agency. We have over 26 different agencies, departments, commissions, boards underneath our umbrella. And so in my role, I provide oversight and support for all of the energy work that's happening at these agencies. Sometimes it's a little piece of the work, sometimes it's not a part of their work, sometimes it's a lot of their work. And so when I think about my priorities, it really stems from our climate and energy goals that are set by legislature and administration. So we have a goal of achieving 100% clean energy by 2045, a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, as well as transitioning away from fossil fuels. So all of our work stems from there and all of our priorities. Of course, the green transition is going to be a lot of work, and so we're focusing on bringing on more clean energy resources and diversifying our portfolio to ensure reliability. So in 2022, 61% of our energy demand was provided by clean energy resources, and I'm really excited to be able to share this stat. At some point earlier this year, for over 30 consecutive days, for at least one moment during those days, 100% of our demand was met by clean energy. So what that tells us is we can do this. But like I mentioned, there's so much more work to do. We need to diversify our portfolio to make sure that we are having a reliable grid, but also really important to us is an equitable and affordable transition, so making sure that we're still keeping rates low, also prioritizing some of our other efforts, so looking at utility infrastructure, making sure that that's safe so that we are reducing the risk of wildfires caused by our utility infrastructure, so another priority for us. We're also looking at electric vehicles, so decarbonization of transportation, because that's a major emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. And then other things that I'm working on more personally, oil and gas. There's a lot of work to be done there to transition away from oil and gas, and thinking through, again, how to do that in an equitable way where everybody's able to transition away from fossil fuels is a really hard conversation. And then another increasingly important topic is carbon removal. Hopefully that was brief.
That was, and as we were talking about backstage, each one of these answers feels like a laundry list of issues and considerations and different points of view. So I appreciate what you said. Kerrie, City of San Jose has some very, very ambitious targets. Net zero by 2030, which all of a sudden is not that far away. How far along are you? And do you think you'll hit the target? And what happens if you don't?
Well, thank you. I mean, we'll definitely hit it, or we'll come super close, right? So, our Climate Smart San Jose plan is built on data. So we embarked to say, what is already happening? What are the other agencies doing? Where could we get the biggest bang for our buck? And then we talked to the community and said, hey, of all these things, which are interesting to you? So which things would you move towards? And the foundation of our plan is the Good Life 2.0. How do we make our community better, happier, and wanting to participate? And then we did an ROI analysis. So sort of looking at all the options before us, and then we charted a path, and we have a dashboard because we believe in tracking and all that stuff. But what we're trying to do is to really kind of do a lot of things at once, but not in a way that the community sort of pushes back and gets turned off. So when we adopted and finalized Climate Smart San Jose in 2018, before I even brought the plan to council, I started San Jose Clean Energy, and we said, hey, we know we have to get 100% renewable energy. So doing those two things all at the same time has really helped us. And then things like banning natural gas in new construction, and then now looking backwards. So sort of stopping the proliferation of the problem, and then going back and offering a lot of incentives to help people. But I'm pragmatic, but I'm also super positive and a little bit naive. So those things together, I'm 100% confident we're going to get there.
I appreciate your candor in that. So to Jason, who's coming to us from Pacific Gas and Electric, as a supplier of energy, what are the implications for utilities like PG&E in helping achieve net zero goals? And this gets really interesting because you're in a position of keeping pace with the promises that your customers have made. And that gets really complicated with energy, with transmission, with all the infrastructure. How do you guys approach that?
Yeah, well, Lincoln, thank you, first of all. I'll say as a partner, to the state of California and the city of San Jose, a lot of our priorities in the portfolio of what we're focused on align with my fellow panelists. I do think it's important, we think about, you mentioned the laundry list. I think sometimes in this discussion of net zero, we can keep kind of recycling the list or trying to make the list longer. And one of the things we're really focused on is, the first 80%, 70, 80, 85% of the way to net zero, we know what the ingredients are. We know what the ingredients are. And so we are really focused on getting those ingredients deployed at scale. If you do by traditional, carbon accounting, PG&E's emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, are dominated by natural gas combustion. And so we have our own net zero plan that is, focused by 2040 on getting to net zero. But we also take a broader view because we know, we're powering the economy more broadly. And so you cannot escape the facts and the data that in California, 40% of emissions come from the transportation sector. And within that 40%, the majority, 3/4, 2/3 to 3/4 is light duty vehicles. We don't get there without electrifying light duty vehicles, period. EVs are inherently, I know there's a lot of discussion, in the mass media and national media around this right now. We just don't get there without EVs, period. EVs are more efficient than internal combustion vehicles, fewer moving parts, lower operating costs, all the things we all know. So first and foremost, we have got to make the EV transition a reality. We have 580,000 electric vehicles operating in our service area today. And so we're laser focused on electrifying transportation. And then we'll move on to looking to electrify other parts of the economy and our customer base and keeping pace with them. And then there's gonna be a chunk of this that's gonna require clean fuels. We're gonna need gas infrastructure for a very long time. We're not intending to be PE, we're gonna be PG&E for a very long time. And we're gonna need to have less gas flowing through that infrastructure, but it's gonna have to be lower carbon and used in particular applications. So those are some of the ingredients that we're really focused on. And I would say in terms of keeping pace, we have our own ambitions. And certainly, Kerrie and I and our teams talk about supporting San Jose towards 2030. And we've actually set an objective for ourselves to be net zero by 2040. So we take the ambitions of the state of California, of our customers, in lockstep, and we're gonna commit to meet them.
Let me go back to Le-Quyen. You talked about the infrastructure and the fact that we have all this infrastructure in our world, including a great big natural gas system. How do you see making the shift to clean energy sources and adapting both the existing infrastructure, which is everywhere, and new infrastructure? For example, retrofitting old housing and building stock, that comes with a really big price tag. On the other hand, not doing anything also comes with a really big price tag. So talk about the economic ramifications and the cost of making this shift, both individual customers and the state overall.
Oh, that's another good question, which I don't have the complete answer to. So there's this line that a lot of energy folks say, which I love to repeat, which is climate change makes it harder to fight climate change. So often the things that we're having to do to fight climate change add costs to the system. Talking about transmission, just hardening the system, upgrading existing transmission lines, or even building new transmissions so that we can continue to bring clean energy or more clean energy resources online, that takes money. And I know this is something that PG&E is struggling with, the state is struggling with, and so there's a lot of people putting their thought power or brain power into thinking through this issue. But you're right, that does have a huge impact to ratepayers, to individual customers. And so what we're trying to do is really think through, again, holistically, all of the pieces that incur costs for customers, both in the near term and long term. So thinking through, the transmission investments that we're making sure that they're smart, making sure that they're in the right areas, making sure, again, in the opportunities that we have to build right from the start, we're doing that. Going back to example, like new homes. So in California, we've been setting building energy efficiency standards for tens of years, and each year, or every couple of years, they get more stringent. So that every few years, a new home is more energy efficient than the previous home. And it does add cost to the initial build of the house, which is, again, an increased upfront cost. But when you look at the energy savings to that customer who's living in that home, those energy savings more than offset what the initial upfront cost was, in addition to increasing the occupant's health and comfort as well. So again, making those types of investments. But there's more that has to come, and so we are definitely looking at leveraging federal investments. So for example, we've been applying for federal funding to support some of the grid infrastructure upgrades that we'll need. We've also been applying for federal funding to help with the EV, that shift. So with the charging infrastructure, making sure that there's more chargers available publicly. Also looking at equitable building decarb, so those existing homes, often those people who are living there, they can't afford to necessarily upgrade their appliances and upgrade the efficiency of their home. That's really expensive. But looking through how we can leverage federal funding to increase like the efforts that we're doing. So again, targeting some of these under-resourced communities and making sure that we're putting money into upgrading their homes so that, again, it's not as expensive for them and they can also transition with the rest of us.
I'll just piggyback on a couple of comments. You referenced the data points. We've studied this for California and for our service area. When we look at the end game in terms of a customer that is, fully or mostly electrified, even after you price in all the infrastructure investment needed, price in wildfire mitigation investment, price in new electric capacity, price in dealing with ongoing operating and maintenance costs and capital investments in the gas system, the average customer in the early 2040s that has made that transition is going to see their total household energy spend decrease by 20+%. It will be lower. And I think we got to keep sight of that end game, but the transition and the path to get there and who pays and how we pay is such a vital thing for us to collaborate on, because there's a lot of moving parts in terms of what should or shouldn't be on the utility bill, what shouldn't or shouldn't be borne by taxpayers. We're going to have this massive shift, as I talked about EVs, of household spend on gasoline that's going to naturally show up in electric load and usage. And so I think we have to figure out as partners and stakeholders and the large institutions shepherding this transition, how we make who and how pays as equitable and seamless as possible to get to that end game. But we need to make sure we don't confuse how attractive the end game is, because there's some difficult questions between here and there.
When I was back in the utility business in Southern California, we were very eager to plan things that had a total cost of ownership that was very low, life cycle cost. But we were always reminded that people don't pay for things. They don't pay their energy bill in net present value. They pay for it in real dollars. And more broadly, though, what I've experienced over my career in the energy business is that green infrastructure in general tends to have a much higher price tag from a CapEx perspective. When you get to the OpEx, when you get it in operation, it's much lower, obviously much more carbon effective as well. But we've got to get the whole world over what I call the green monster, because I'm a Yankees fan. Get the whole world over that green monster of CapEx, whether they have a Stanford-like credit rating and can borrow all the money without blinking an eye, or they have a lower income credit rating, or even, for example, like a city in bankruptcy. Let me jump to Kerrie here. Could you talk about the role that cities can play, especially municipal-owned utilities can play, in easing that transition?
Well, sure, thanks. I mean, I'd start by saying certainly the cost is important, but the cost isn't everything. I mean, people don't buy a $100,000 Tesla because they're looking to save money, right? So how do you get that cool factor in there so that people are bragging about, hey, look at my induction stove, it's so cool. Wow, the temperature in my house feels much better because I have a heat pump, or hey, I never had air conditioning and now I do because I went all electric. And so not just having the conversation be about that incremental cost, and certainly, PG&E and others have done a great job with on-bill financing and finding ways to make that work. But one of the things that we're seeing in our community is, boy, there's a lot of choices, and it's crazy confusing, even for folks that think they're smart. I meet with my neighbors, and they're like, I don't know which direction to go. So one of the things we've started partnering with Block Power is kind of a concierge service. So a one-stop shop where you go in and retrofitting each home is a little bit different, and they'll walk you through, hey, this is what you need in your house, and here's all the incentives, and here's how we can help finance that, and here's how you might want to time it to take advantage of some of the tax incentives and that kind of thing. But that hand-holding is expensive for a municipality. And so, I'm not saying we're ready to have Siri answer that question for us, but we would like to be able to move to that, right? How do I make the choice so clear and so obvious? And some of that starts with contractors. So we're spending a lot of time with, the contractor comes to your house, you're kind of counting on them to guide you in the right direction. So it's a lot of different parts, but certainly talking about the life cycle, your monthly bill, but from an emotional standpoint, why should you want that for those that are at an income level that can afford it? And then, as you shared, for those where the money is much tighter, we need to have a lot of incentives. And we did just release some incentives for heat pumps and others, and I'm proud that we're sold out in the first month. And so that tells us, okay, we hit the mark, and Mayor Mahon, let's go get some more money. So getting those conversations going.
Jason, where do you see that from the investor-owned side? Because obviously investor-owned utilities have a very different regulatory model, very different cost recovery model, and customer service model as opposed to a municipal. Where do you see the big utilities in particular like PG&E playing a role in easing that glide path to decarbonization?
And specific to some of the conversation we were just having, building electrification, home electrification. I think there's a vital partnership, with cities like San Jose in this, because I think you're going to end up in very local demographics, communities, needs, and we've got to make sure that we're working closely with our partners. Something we are very focused on is, one, absolutely the customer experience, to your point, Kerrie. I mean, this can't be, the scale and magnitude and complexity of this transition cannot be kind of door to door, for lack of a better way to put it. Door to door is not going to cut it. And so we've got to find a way to do something that's different from door to door. One of the things we're very focused on is finding what the prototype is and building blocks for how do you electrify. So what's the right scale where we can take a chunk of the gas system, distribution mains that might otherwise need replacement in the next 10 years or 15 years for safety or reliability or other reasons, and lining that up where we think there's customer propensity, lining up where we have willing local partners, and trying to find that intersection. We don't yet, I will say, when I say we, as a state, nationally, as a society, don't yet have a model for that. We're trying in a couple places. We have a partnership with Cal State Monterey Bay to work on campus electrification prototype there, but we're really focused on bringing together those lenses of customer behavior, customer choice, the engineering and operational and regulatory considerations, because as we retire those assets, we've got to make sure that the cost that's been invested in them isn't stranded, because otherwise we're all going to be paying for it, right? Those are the things where, in terms of integrating those different lenses, we're really focused on. But the thing we're really trying to avoid, again, because it would be not achieve our decarbonization or economic or customer experience objectives, is what you call it block by block or Swiss cheese, where Jason's fully electrified, Kerrie has a heat pump but a gas stove, Le-Quyen is still driving a 15 mile per gallon car but is otherwise electric. That doesn't cut it, right? And so we've got to find ways to take chunks of the system in repeatable blocks and transition them. That's what we're really focused on.
Yeah. And I want to throw a curveball to Le-Quyen here. A lot of this in California, I mean, we tend towards prescriptive regulation in a lot of cases. And I'm wondering where you see the balance between regulating from a here's what you need to do perspective versus here's the outcome you need to achieve perspective. So either saying, here's the solution, go do it, or here's the outcome, go do it. How do we balance those things in this time of intense and change and a lot of uncertainty in terms of the choices?
Let's see, I hope I don't get in trouble for my answer. I think it has to be both. The energy system in California is super complicated, and there's so many interconnecting parts. So I think at some point, there is a role we have to play where we do have to actually be prescriptive in some of our approaches. So again, when we look at the building energy efficiency standards, there's a prescriptive approach where, we're telling the builders, you should be building X, Y, Z. However, there's a little bit of there's a little bit of choice there where we tell them, here's a list of things that you can choose from to get to this level. So, if each measure you're selecting has a value associated with it, pick whichever ones you want just to get to this score. So it's a little bit of both. But California is so diverse. We have so many different regions where every region will be a little bit different in terms of their priorities and what's the values for those communities. And so sometimes you have to do a little bit of a prescriptive approach, again, like trying to get to 100% clean energy. We're not going to do that if everybody is able to figure out whether they want it in their backyard or not in their backyard. We have to make hard choices of where is this energy going to be sited. And so unfortunately, you do have to do a little bit of prescriptive approach where, the state does have to do some of that regulation. They do have to do some of that governance. However, local governments are super important, and that collaboration and partnership is also very important because they should have a say in how things get implemented in their communities. And they should be able to share with us, some of the values that their communities have so that we can tweak how we're doing things. So maybe I'm walking back my answer. Maybe it's not both. Maybe it's like a blend between the two, where we have to set these overarching goals. We have to set kind of this framework for how we're going to get all of this done, and then look to partner with the utilities, with the local governments to help us get it done in the appropriate way for their communities.
And I would add things like our building performance standards, where they do have, the building owners have choices. I mean, eventually you're going to do all of them. So, the list gets smaller as you work your way through, but they can choose based on the levers that are important to them. But each year they do need to sort of step it up a little.
Just to add one thing too about the importance of the partnership with the local governments is, sometimes they're able to do things that the state wishes we could do, but aren't at that level yet. So Kerrie mentioned banning natural gas in new homes. That is somewhere that we want to get to that point where we are discouraging, new homes from building natural gas. It was mentioned earlier, the stranded assets. We don't want people, as we electrify our homes, to be stuck with stranded assets. So why not try and discourage people from installing natural gas appliances or even installing those natural gas lines at the beginning when we can help it? But again, these are things where the local governments are taking the lead and they're helping to show that it can be done, that there is acceptance of these things. So that's why I think, again, it's a blended approach.
I think I'll just add, I agree with everything that's been said. I think there's no substitute for the ability of the state of California. Any state and local government, but particularly the state of California, given our history and the size of the market and as a global innovation leader, to set a standard and a policy around building codes, or set a standard and a policy around no new internal combustion vehicles sold after 2035. And then I do think there's a healthy discussion about how do we establish frameworks that can endure with the pace of technological change. I don't think one thing that I'm always struck by when we think about the paradigm we've been in our state in particular, we've had, on the electric side, flat load for basically 20 years. And we've actually had a policy objective to destroy electric demand. I use that verb deliberately. Our objective has actually been to destroy demand for 50 years. And now we have a policy environment that says, we want to grow it. We want to double it in the next 20. And so we have some work, and that has changed in just the last few years, really. And so we have to work together to find the right framework that can endure, that can fit that new paradigm and that can endure.
Yeah, I often think about growing up with the assumption, actually the message from the utilities, that wash your clothes overnight, do your dishes overnight. All of those ideas about shifting load away from the times when the sun was out And now, with so much solar in the system, we're telling people, oh, we need you to do the exact opposite of that. If the sun is out, we need you to do everything, because that's when we've got, in many cases, too much solar on the system. It really, to me, raises the whole question of behavior change. And so much of these technologies require us, for example, charging. Charging used to be something you did at the grocery store or the department store with a card, right? Now we charge things as a matter of course, including increasingly our vehicles. Where do you see the behavior change happening? Where do you think it's the most painful? And who has the responsibility to drive that? This is a total unrehearsed. So give them a second to think about it. You want to start?
I'm happy to give it a shot. I mean, I think, one of the things I think about, particularly in, I think the discussion we were just having in the building electrification space is a big, wide open field that we really need to figure out. But I'll talk about in the electric vehicle space. I think in our industry, we sometimes can default to assuming that the only way or the best way to drive behavior is through price signals. And just so we're clear, we are all for the right economics and the right price signals so that we can drive this transition at the lowest societal cost. I also think that modern software, and we think about EVs or rolling software, creates the opportunity for defaults in terms of behavior and defaults in terms of nudges and things like that can really make a difference, right? So, my EV has a setting that can let me know, when to charge based on when the grid is lowest carbon intensity. Your iPhones have that now too. I don't know if folks have seen that feature in the settings on your phone. It can optimize charging based on the carbon intensity of your location at that moment in time. So I think about that. I think about the idea that could we have a world where, every new EV sold in California defaults to whatever the right charging profile is, for where they live, for their circuit, for their commute patterns, right? So I think there's a ton of opportunity to optimize and make it do it for me that we haven't fully explored yet, and not in software can be used to drive behavior in malicious ways. This is an opportunity to use it to drive behavior for major societal benefit, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of that.
Kerrie?
Well, I think it's all of our responsibilities, and yours all too. I'm looking forward to that wave. So I think it's all of us all the time, right? It's looking for an opportunity for one community. This might work, and then looking for what it might work in a different sector. Like my daughter's 20, something might work for her. I'm not going to tell you my mom's age, could she kill me? But something probably might not. The same thing might not work for her. But but I think it's setting the expectations. So while you remember, do your laundry at night, my daughter doesn't remember being told to turn the light switch off, right? She knows that. She also grew up with me. But she knows that, right? And so how do we make those things that were sort of quirky and we had to remind ourselves normal for the next generation so that it continues forward? But I think it's going to be an iterative process as it has been, but I think we need to pick up the pace and we need to start running a lot faster.
Le-Quyen?
So I think I totally agree with what my fellow panelists said. I think also just making everything as easy, transparent as possible for the customer, for the consumer, for the operator. I know we don't have a ton of time on this panel, but I can share that I've owned 3 EVs, and if I didn't believe in the clean energy transition, if I wasn't an EV convert, I would probably not be driving an EV because I've had the worst possible experiences with EVs. But yet I still love them, right? Because I truly believe in it. So again, to me, it's about making the customer or consumer experience as transparent, easy to access as possible. So for example, when we talk about transportation electrification, things like, are there chargers that people can easily access near you? When you're thinking about, I need to drive to LA from here? Are you worried because you're not going to be able to make it? So making sure that there's, chargers that are easily accessible. Are they fast chargers so that you don't have to sit there for 2 hours waiting to charge, where you can maybe just get gas, take a quick walk in half an hour, be ready to get on the road again? Are there availability of chargers? So, maybe there's 100 people now driving a Tesla at like 6 p.m. going to LA on a certain day. Are there enough Tesla chargers? Or when you get there, can you even pay? Like, do you even have the same payment system with the Tesla charger that you may have with a different brand car? Or is the charger even working? So all of these things, right, can frustrate the consumer and can really change that experience. They can turn people off from getting an EV. I have my own experience with a heat pump that I could share, right? But there's so many opportunities actually to turn a customer away from transitioning to clean energy. And so making those changes to make it easy, and those are things that we are doing. So all the things that I spoke to, one of our agencies, the Energy Commission, they're working on regulations that hits every single one of those points that I talked about. Tesla's now opening up their charging network to other EV models, which is great. It'll make sure that there's more EV chargers available. But those are the things that I think about. Sorry.
No, that's great. I want to switch gears. There's the behavior change, which is the hard part, because we humans are the hard part. But there's also the glamorous part, which is technology. And I'm curious what technologies you're seeing that are particularly interesting in driving this net zero transition. And I will say the AI word, just in case artificial intelligence is part of that. Anybody want to start?
I could start.
Sure.
Well, I'll leave AI to my colleagues who are probably more knowledgeable about it than I am. Some big things that I see, heat pump technology for sure. So that's something that we've been spending a lot of time on. We actually have a goal of 6 million heat pumps in California. Those can be more efficient than the traditional counterparts, as well as save money. So heat pumps are big. One that we don't talk about as much, but which I mentioned and getting more into, is carbon removal technologies. So the California Air Resources Board, every few years, they do a scoping plan, which basically is like a roadmap for how are we going to achieve carbon neutrality. And in their last update to this roadmap, they said that there's no way we're going to achieve carbon neutrality if we're not also removing existing carbon out of the atmosphere. And so carbon removal is something that I've been spending a lot of work on. So thinking about, possibly how do you, in this transition that we talked about, because it's very clearly a transition to clean energy, if we need natural gas plants in the near term, can you put carbon removal technologies on these natural gas plants so that maybe they're still running, but they're emitting less emissions? Also, can you take carbon out of the air and what can you utilize it in? So for example, cement, it's really energy intensive, produces a lot of emissions, but maybe we could use some of that carbon that's captured and utilize it in the cement making process. So again, maybe less energy intensive, reducing that carbon footprint for cement, looking at other, hard to decarbonize sectors where again, maybe you could pull those, use carbon removal technologies to help decarbonize. So for example, it's really expensive right now, but using captured carbon dioxide in creating fuels. So for example, they're already doing that for airplanes as well as cruise ships. And then of course I have to mention green hydrogen, and I say green because we want it to be clean hydrogen, but we also see green hydrogen as a way to decarbonize some of these hard to decarbonize sectors, such as, like we talked about light passenger duty vehicles, the cars that, most of us are driving every day. Those could be electrified, but if you're driving like a truck, maybe that's harder to electrify because that means a more heavy battery, which could potentially mean, less room to haul cargo or longer to charge. So we see green hydrogen as a potential to help decarbonize that sector.
Kerrie, you've got an airport. Talk about aviation and electrifying that, or just at least decarbonizing that if it's not electricity all the time.
Well, we're hopefully anybody that flew into San Jose, we're very proud of that airport. And the airport has its own unique carbon neutrality plan where they're looking, because they are different, right? So they're looking at, fuel changes to, how do we get different transportation to the airport so that people don't need to utilize the parking garage there. And so, you know, it's as challenging as the residential market, right? Because the airplanes fly all over the world. And so we can't just make one change without getting everyone else involved. But then again, if somebody doesn't start it, it never happens, right? So looking at where maybe some of the California-only flights could adjust things, and then how we could move more quickly. But the airport's done a lot in terms of water use reduction, as well as looking at our building infrastructure, and then certainly the fuel for the planes.
Jason, that also implies an extraordinary increase in electricity consumption at the airport, which of course needs substations and then transmission lines and then more substations and more transmission lines. How does PG&E, especially in its role as transmission operator, how does PG&E think about this step change in demand as we electrify these big consumer sectors?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge challenge and opportunity. If you look at the history of our industry, there's not another time you can look to like this, except maybe, the post-World War II period. Coming back from the war, I mean, the amount of infrastructure we built 14 new power plants in the 5 years following World War II, I think, back when we were really in the generation business, tons of T&D. I think you think about a world where we're going to double demand, more or less, next 20 years for electricity. We've got to find ways to make sure, one, that the system is more effectively utilized. So simple measure load factor on the wires. So average use versus peak use today in most of the US and for us is like 45 or 50%, which for a really capital intensive business, any other industry would say that is not where we want to be. So we are really focused on how do we crank that up and, for lack of a better word, sweat the assets more, and get more utilization out of every dollar and out of every line mile put in the ground. We think by the early 2040s, that number could be 75 or 80%. So some of the ways we're doing that is making sure that, for every investment we make in infrastructure, that we're getting we say a 2-fer or 3-fer, right? So if we're undergrounding a line for wildfire reduction, we're also getting resilience to low snow or windstorms, and we're also making sure that the capacity is there for electrification. It's really important. We're trying to make sure that we bundle where we have maintenance tags and work to do, that we don't go out on a onesie-twosie basis and roll a truck one week and then roll a truck again the next week and roll a truck again the week after that, but we actually package up all the work, package up the permits, get it all done at once. It sounds kind of rudimentary, but it's actually a meaningful change for us and partners and municipalities and for our regulatory partners. The third ingredient to make it doable that we're really focused on is this piece around load management. And from a technology perspective, I mean, ballpark, we have about 1 gigawatt on our system of load management today. We've got to grow that by a factor of 5 to 10. That's the type of scale we're looking at. And that's where batteries play a huge role. I think AI plays a role in orchestrating that. So we're really trying to find ways, actually, and I know it sounds odd for a utility to say this, to make sure that we can actually reduce the amount of capital infrastructure that's needed, because it could become overwhelming in terms of the pace of build needed if we weren't to do it that way. Now then I'll say we're still gonna have to build a lot. I know our colleagues down at Edison have published stats looking at something like 4x the pace of distribution build and 10x the pace of transmission build. Our numbers are similar. So we've got to find ways to do the types of things I was mentioning on the distribution system, where we're getting those 2-fers and 3-fers and bundling the work more effectively. We actually just completed a 10-year grid plan where we look out over 10 years and say, for the distribution system, what are all of the needs, so we can package the investment most effectively and get it done in an economic manner for customers. I think the transmission side, the partnership with the state, the CAISO, we have work to do. as a state in terms of expediting permitting timelines, in terms of making sure the supply chain is there for high voltage equipment. We continue to see constraints there. So, I think we know what the levers are, and then we got to work together to go make it happen.
Well, we're running out of time, so I just want to do a quick, unrehearsed popcorn round. If you, in your role, whether it's policymaker or municipal or investor-owned utility, if you could remove or at least reduce one hurdle to reaching decarbonization, other than money's the easy answer, so I just took away the easy answer, but if you could reduce one hurdle or mitigate it, what would that be? Pregnant pause. Go
I
ahead.
think from a community and even a commercial sector, it's sort of that skepticism around, well, am I really going to have to do it? And getting people more excited. Like when you talk about how quickly we built those power plants, right? Like we can do it when we're ready, and so it would be sort of fast tracking to get to the point where we're ready to really run.
Okay, can I take another easy one? I think time is a barrier. Climate change is happening so quickly, and it takes time to work through some of these solutions. Jason mentioned about the investments and, stranded assets. But again, as we're working through this clean energy transition, we don't have time to as thoughtfully plan this out as we would like. It'd be different, for example, if you're building a home. If you're building it from scratch, you can lay out exactly what you want, when you want it. But we're dealing with existing infrastructure here and new infrastructure. So, if you had an existing home, you can't just scrap it and create a whole new house when you have limitations of money, time, all of these things. So I think because climate change is happening so fast, we're having to move quickly to respond to it, to address these impacts. But we need more time to, again, more thoughtfully plan out something that's more holistic, that's not just addressing issues as they come up, but needs time for us to be able to collaborate, which is happening. But again, I just think we could do broader, more landscape scale planning efforts around a lot of these issues.
I really could have a list of about 20. I think, I'm reflecting, I think if I had to pick one, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be a booster shot of trust. One of our virtues at PG&E is to be trustworthy, and we know given, our history, that's a challenge in some communities, and we're working our tails off every single day to rebuild trust. I think that's also in an environment where societally trust in large institutions and in government, state, local, whatever level, has eroded over time. That's just been a trend line. And my colleagues up here on the panel and anyone who works in the energy business is generally doing so because they're mission driven. They're doing so because they're mission driven and they really care. And I think that it's going to require a lot of trust to follow the state's direction, to follow, hey, PG&E thinks here's what we should go do. And we say we should go underground 10,000 miles. It's the right thing to do. It actually saves customers money. It reduces risk. We did our homework on that. It is the right answer, but there's skepticism around it. And so I think there's going to be a lot more of those choices that are going to come to bear over the next year and 5 and 10 years, that we're going to need that trust to help make up for some of the time sense, the lack of time and the sense of urgency.
Lincoln, what's yours?
I'm kind of blown away by the trust idea, because that trust in these are massive undertakings. Either they're massive in terms of infrastructure and billions of dollars, or they're massive in terms of we need everybody driving an EV. And so that trust, Jason's really got me thinking, that trust element, if we can move the benefit of the doubt needle even a couple of degrees, I think there is that then leverages to tremendous outcomes. So with that, I want to thank my amazing panel. I want to thank the audience, and I'm going to hold my breath and see if you give us a wave.
Where do we start?
Starting over here. There we go. All right. Very nice. Thank you.